Hello, everyone, and welcome to Touchdown Tuesdays, the first episode of 2019. I am your co host, Ian DeMars, alongside Ryan Solomon. And Ryan, we entered the new year with a lot of interesting things happening in not only college football, but the NFL.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. For some reason, now that the playoffs are starting, it just feels like everything is in a whirlwind. And there are a lot of interesting stories that developed over the weekend. So let's start with the teams that I guess made the playoffs, is where you should start, wouldn't you say, Ian?
Yeah, we can definitely start there. You look at this past week in football. You look at Sunday. It was Sunday night was kind of a big primetime game. It did lead up. Allow us to talk about that with our question of the week, which was basically who's going to win the must win or go home game between the Colts and the Titans. And surprisingly, despite being at home, despite being on the road, the Colts were actually favored in both our Twitter and Facebook polls, getting about three-quarters of the vote in each of them. And the Colts ended up going out and dominating in Tennessee to snag that final playoff spot, and they will be playing Houston on Saturday. The other teams that were able to get in, we saw Baltimore clinch the AFC North, and then we saw the Eagles sneak into the playoffs after the Vikings lost at home to the Chicago Bears. So, looking at the teams that got in, which one were you surprised with?
I wasn't really surprised that any of them got in based on the results we saw heading into week 17. However, I was surprised looking back onto where they were at the start of the year. So not at the start of the year, but in the middle of the year. So if you look at the Eagles, they had no business making the playoffs until they got rid of Nick Foles. Or not Nick Foles, Carson Wentz, until Carson Wentz got hurt. So what was surprising about that is their starting quarterback goes out. Nick Foles comes up back in there, improbable to make the playoffs as it is. And then all of a sudden they go on a tear with Foles. So I think if you look at it, it was really surprising that the Eagles went in or got in the playoffs. And kind of the same with the Colts on the other side. That team started 1-5, and then they all of a sudden got it together and went on a tear too. So those are two teams that have a ton of momentum going in now that you wouldn't have thought would have made the playoffs.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. You look at the way Andrew Luck played down the stretch for the Colts, you could easily say he put himself somewhat in the MVP conversation. It's not looking like it'll be his year, though, with the numbers that Patrick Mahomes put up. But you could definitely say that his play definitely put the Colts back into the playoffs. And then you look at the Eagles, it just seemed very strange how Carson Wentz went from one last year being the MVP to getting injured, and now all of a sudden this year comes back and was pretty inconsistent for the most part. But it wasn't just him; that whole team was very inconsistent throughout the whole year. And then you look at the last few weeks; they were able to kind of put it all together. But it's kind of a weird situation for them because they have a very tough playoff game to start off the end wild card weekend, going to Chicago against the very tough Chicago Bears defense. So, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm surprised with either or, but I do have to say Baltimore is a little bit surprising because you look at that team. They started the season very well. People are saying that Joe Flacco was finally playing up to his contract a little bit. And then we started to see some of the same inconsistencies that they've had the past few years, where the offense was slowing down. They really couldn't do much with the run game. The defense was still there, but the offense was the issue. And look at Joe Flacco gets injured, and Lamar Jackson comes in, and we're still seeing some of the struggles. Not necessarily, I would say, running wise. They're starting to figure out the running game, but they really don't have much of a passing game now. I mean, Lamar Jackson wasn't necessarily the best passing quarterback when he was at Louisville, but the Ravens did take a risk with him, and we're starting to see some of the things that they were a little bit worried about when he came in. But you want to know what? He did improve that team. So I would still say I'm surprised Baltimore was able to turn things around to get in. But even though they do host the Chargers this week, I'm not so sure if they're the ones that should have gotten in. I mean, you look at Pittsburgh, they were just in a really win-world of a situation this year with no Le'Veon Bell. the whole situation with Antonio Brown, which we'll go into a little bit later, and the future of Ben Roethlisberger. So as much as you can make an argument about any one of these teams, I would definitely say that even though Baltimore won their division, but I think they're the most surprising team of the three.
Yeah, they also could go as a big surprise too. I really don't think they're going to have a good showing in the playoffs, even though I know they beat the Chargers once this year. I really think that the Chargers are going to win that game. I think Lamar Jackson's going to struggle. I think when teams realize how to defend his running ability, there's not a whole lot left there for him to play quarterback with.
Yeah, and then you do look at it. They did just play a couple weeks ago, and even though they were able to keep Jackson in check a little bit, the only issue we saw the Chargers have that week where they did lose to the Ravens was the offense. So I think if they get the offense going early in the game, I think they should be able to get things figured out.
Yeah, that could be true. They're a team that is definitely better playing ahead just because of how they're designed, with the running game being so essential to them. And I don't think if they get behind, they can really pass their way back into the game, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And we'll talk a little bit more about the playoffs later, just to dive into it. But yeah, it was a very interesting Sunday in the NFL where we saw some of these scenarios turn out. But there was also some more interesting things we saw later on Sunday and then leading into Monday. That's the annual NFL holiday, as you would say, as they call Black Monday, which is basically the day after the regular season ends, where we see all the coaching fired, all the NFL coaches that end up getting fired. And this year, including the middle of the regular season, where we did see a couple get let go, we saw a total of 8 coaches get fired, whether it be on Monday or Sunday or at some point during the season, meaning a quarter of the NFL teams in the league do not have a coach going into the offseason. Ryan, are you surprised that we have this high of a number of openings?
I am a little surprised. But when you look at these firings, there weren't a lot of them that you could not see coming, really. The only one, perhaps, is Steve Wilks, because he only got one season. Based on the performance of the team this year, it's not surprising. But based on the fact that it was only 1 year, he didn't really get a chance to try to build anything there. That was a little surprising. All the other firings you could kind of see coming a mile away. But the thing about this Black Monday that made things more interesting or more talked about than usual was the amount of minority coaches that were fired. So this leads a lot of people around the NFL or that comment on the NFL to say that there's some sort of systemic racism that's surrounding the coaching in the NFL, leading to all these black coaches getting fired compared to white coaches in the NFL. What do you think about this, Ian?
I mean, you definitely make a very strong point about it. I mean, just looking at some of the news this week, if I'm right, I believe we only have now 2 active head coaches that are minorities, which is a crazy thing to think about, especially since we had talked about it not so long ago about the whole issue or the whole controversial comments by LeBron James. And now you're starting to think that now you kind of have to think about that seriously now with all the coaches that did get let go, leaving barely a handful of minority coaches now in the NFL. So I was kind of surprised to see all of this. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully we see some of these coaches get opportunities again, or new coaches get chances. But yeah, I do agree. I was kind of shocked to see so many of these coaches let's go. I mean, you look at some of them weren't too surprising. I mean, Marvin Lewis finally got let go. So, I mean, a lot of NFL fans were probably happy to see that, since people thought that, or fans thought that his stay there was overdue and he should have been let go a couple of years ago. Todd Bowles, that team hasn't really looked too good, even though they are rebuilding. They kind of need to go, I think, in another direction. As you said, Steve Wilks is a little bit surprising, but I think the reason why they let him go isn't because they don't think he can be a good coach. It's just they took such a step back this year, because remember, last year they weren't necessarily a solid team, but they still finished around 500. So the fact that you took a big step back this year kind of, I think, shows that he wasn't necessarily the coach for that team. I do think he'll get another opportunity. And then you look at Vance Joseph. I mean, the first his 2 years there, they were 5-11 and 6-10, And you want to know what? If he keeps going on this trend up, it's going to take them possibly 5 years to get it before they even have a shot to make the playoffs. So they could tell that it wasn't really going in the right direction for him either. But of all of these coaches that firings that we did see, I think the one I was kind of a little bit surprised of was Adam Gase. I mean, you look at him; he's been there for 3 years. They've basically been around 500 each year. They made the playoffs his first year as a head coach, and it's kind of interesting because we can see at times where they're a very good offensive team and can play solid defense, but we can also see the times where you have to remember they play in the AFC East and they play the Patriots. So that's a tough task for him to overcome. I felt like if they would have looked into their talent pool for this upcoming offseason, that maybe they could have evaluated him for one more year. But, I mean, you look at that team, you're not really sure about a lot of the players on that team going forward. So I guess at that point they realized that if we're getting rid of him, maybe it's time to just get rid of everyone.
Yeah, you make a good point with that because he hasn't had the benefit of even having a starting quarterback for the last 2 seasons for a lot of the games. So Ryan Tannehill constantly injured, and there's still questions about Ryan Tannehill, whether he's even a good starting quarterback or not. And he did take them to the playoffs and then had basically marginal seasons after that. Actually had pretty good success beating the Patriots. The last 2 seasons in Miami, they were able to defeat the Patriots. So a little bit surprised by that. But I guess when you look at it, the team didn't seem like it was trending upward. I guess that's why he got let go. My take on this is that people are asking the wrong question about the black coaches. And I think, like I said, the Steve Wilks one, you could ask questions about it. But he got hired last year. Not that much has changed, so I don't think any sort of racist agenda had anything to do with that. But the question being asked is, why are so many black coaches being fired? Is the NFL racist? I think the better question is, why aren't black coaches succeeding in the NFL? Because as you mentioned, there's only 2 black coaches left now, only one of which actually had a winning season and took their team to the playoffs, and that's Anthony Lynn with the Chargers. These other coaches had losing records this year. A lot of them didn't have success over the past years either. Todd Bowles had a playoff team his first year and then hasn't taken them back to the playoffs in 3 straight seasons. Vance Joseph, 2 losing seasons in a row. After that team won a Super Bowl recently, so that fan base wants success instantly. Steve Wilks, not a winning team. That team looked worse as they went through the years or the games. And then Marvin Lewis, 0-7 in playoffs in the history with the team, and there are many, many seasons he had many chances to get it right. So the question that you have to ask is, why aren't these coaches succeeding? It doesn't seem like they're not being given ample opportunities. It doesn't seem like they're fired without just cause. So I think that we're looking at the wrong thing here. And instead of looking at the NFL being racist, we should just be looking at these people not succeeding individually.
Yeah, I definitely, you make a very solid point on that there. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, though, when we see some of these coaches get hired, because if we don't see any minority coaches get hired, it might bring that question up again. But yeah, you do bring up that point that we don't really see many of them succeeding in the NFL. So I think that they have to, I think, do some more work in the NFL, whether it be being a coordinator, being an assistant, or doing something so that they can do something. But that's something we're going to have to just wait and see. But I'm going to ask, I want you to answer 3 questions for me in regards to the whole coaching searches that we're going to be seeing soon. So who's the most attractive coach that could get hired? What's the most attractive destination? And what spot's going to be filled first?
Okay, so I think that the most attractive situation and the most attractive coach, we can look at the same place where he just left. And I think that's Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers. So Aaron Rodgers should be one of the best players in the NFL at this point. And I think that having the stability at the coaching position is something that none of these other locations really have. You could argue perhaps Cincinnati, perhaps Arizona with Josh Rosen just being drafted last year, perhaps Cleveland with Baker Mayfield, but none of those guys have been proven to be able to win playoff games at this point in time. Aaron Rodgers is a proven Super Bowl quarterback. So anybody who's there has an opportunity to immediately take that team from what was a very disappointing season to a season where they should at least live up to their expectations. And if you do that, all of a sudden you get to say, look, I turned the team around. You have instant job stability for probably at least 3 years. if you look at the most attractive coach, there's only one coach that got let go that has a Super Bowl championship under his belt while he was head coach. That's Mike McCarthy. McCarthy demonstrated that for whatever shortfalls he has the ability to take a team that was starting with a young quarterback and bring them into a contender for the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. So I think any team out there at this point should be eager to hire Mike McCarthy if they want to see their team go up in the right direction and see a guy who has some experience come in and deal with those situations that some of these other coaches might not be equipped to deal with. As far as who fills their spot first, that's really anybody's guess. I know a lot of places have set up interviews already or interviewed. I really am not sure with that one because I think after firing a coach, a lot of these teams are going to be wary to just go out and hire one right away.
Yeah, definitely make a good point on the last one. Looking at mine, I'm going to go a little different direction. So first, I'm going to look at destination. And I think if you're looking at most positive outlook future-wise, I think you have to look at Cleveland, honestly, because you look at that team, last couple of years, they've only had one win. And this year, after they let go of Hugh Jackson, that team took off, and you were able to see that this team can play some solid football. Baker Mayfield broke the NFL record for most touchdown passes during a rookie campaign. And remember, he didn't play the first few games of the year. So if you put him in the first few games of the year, I mean, you could easily put him over 30 touchdowns. Suddenly, maybe Cleveland's a better team. Maybe they're a playoff team or just missing the playoffs as they did this year. Nick Chubb was a phenomenal back once they gave him the reins this year. And that defense has been very phenomenal throughout the past couple of years. It's just been a matter of finding the right coach and getting the right offense. So I think when you look at the most attractive destination, I think you have to look at Cleveland just because of all the young talent and the upside that team has. If you're looking at the most attractive coach, I mean, I don't want to say it just because we've seen kind of mixed results from him during the past couple of off seasons, and that's Josh McDaniels. I mean, you look at this was a prime opportunity, I think, for Josh McDaniels. You look at the reason why he didn't take the coach job last year. I don't know if it was necessarily because the Patriots made like a last-second ditch effort to keep him. I think it was because he wasn't really sure about the quarterback. And you look at Andrew Luck, the first few games, you were kind of questioning him, but he turned out great, and he might have missed out on an opportunity there. But you look at two possibilities for Josh McDaniels. Going to Green Bay and becoming the head coach for Aaron Rodgers. That could be great. Or you could go the other route and be the head coach for a young quarterback in Cleveland like Baker Mayfield. I think that the offensive talent base that McDaniels has been able to turn around into star potential players has to be someone you look at to help develop a team, whether that be a young rising team in Cleveland or a team that's looking to find some pieces in Green Bay. I think he should be the one that is the most attractive. He's been the most attractive the last few years, but if Lincoln Riley didn't re-sign with Oklahoma, I'd probably say him. But I think you have to look at Josh McDaniels here going forward. I think this will be the year that he actually does leave New England and he takes a job somewhere else. And I think those two positions are the best opportunities for him. Now, looking at who's going to fill the job first, or where are we going to see someone get hired first? You're right. This is a very tough question to answer because it's just so hard to look at the possibilities. But I do believe we will see someone get hired, I would probably say within the next week, to be honest. And I think that it's going to be one of those teams that I'm going to say it's an AFC team. I think it's either going to be – it's not going to be Cleveland. I think it's either going to be Cincinnati or Miami. They're going to do a quick interview process, and I think they're going to find one of those two teams are going to find the next head coach within the next week.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. The only reason I don't like the Cleveland slot is because I really still don't think that Baker Mayfield is going to eventually pan out as a good quarterback. I know he had a pretty good season this year. I just don't trust him long term. So I think that especially somebody who's not ready to deal with a young player could end up in a bad situation there. But we'll see about that one. But let's go to a different quarterback that I want to talk about, and that's Kirk Cousins. So that million upon $1 million gamble doesn't look like it paid off, at least this year for the Vikings, in which Cousins didn't even get that team to the playoffs whereas Case Keenum the last year took them all the way to the NFC Championship game. Do you think that this officially proves that this was a bad move by that team, or do you think that Kirk Cousins is going to redeem himself going forward and that it will end up being a good move for them?
I mean, I remember when we first talked about the Kirk Cousins signing, and I said that this was the guy they needed to get to the Super Bowl. And then I also put in those question marks about this guy puts up solid numbers, but there's just always an issue when it comes to Kirk Cousins. And you want to know what? We saw the same thing from Kirk Cousins this year. Put up very solid numbers, but he wasn't able to get the clutch time wins that they needed. We saw the couple of years where he made those big post-game reactions, the you like that or the how do you like me now. I believe that was the one year they made the playoffs. But we don't really see any of that now from Kirk Cousins. He's not the best clutch quarterback, and he doesn't necessarily play the best on the road. And that's become an issue for this team. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what they need to do at quarterback. I mean, Kirk Cousins could develop more next year. It could have just been the fact that he wasn't used to this group of talent that he's had, since you could say it's his best group of talent that he's had probably in his NFL career. But we need to see him win some of these big-time games. And he had those opportunities this year. He wasn't able to win on the road in Cleveland or on the road in New England. Wasn't able to win on the road in Seattle. And he doesn't necessarily seem to put up those bigger numbers when it comes to Sunday Night Football. And it is unfortunate because Kirk Cousins is a talented quarterback, but he's just not able to perform when they really need him to. I mean, you look at we posted about Kirk Cousins this week, and we did get some comments back. Mark DeMars out of Escanaba, Michigan, commented saying that he said all along they should have just kept Case Keenum. And you're looking at it now, Case Keenum, didn't necessarily have the best season. There were rumors that he was going to get benched at one point during the year. They did end up going 6-10, but part of me does want to question if Keenum was with this offense, do you think he would have been able to find more success? I think that maybe he does, but it's kind of tough to tell, I think, at this point.
I mean, maybe, but I think a big reason for that is because chemistry. So that team last year wasn't supposed to be quite as good as they were. They lost their starting quarterback. They didn't make the playoffs the year before that. So it was kind of like the expectations were low. Then Case Keenum came in, and that team just picked it up together. This year, they brought in somebody new. They replaced the guy that led them to the NFC Championship last year. You have to think that there's going to be some growing pains there for the Vikings, not to mention the fact that the Bears kind of came out of nowhere this year, too. The Bears beat them twice. If not for the Bears being as good as they were, this team's in the playoffs. We're talking about them winning a division this year. So things just didn't really turn out the way that they wanted it to in the division, with the Bears being good. The Packers still were a non-factor, so they lucked out there. But last year was kind of the culmination of a lot of good and or lucky things for that team, especially with the Minnesota Miracle. So there was a lot that had to go right last year, and the chances of it happening right again were very slim, even if they brought in a quarterback that is better than Case Keenum. I think it's hard to say that he's not better than Case Keenum, simply because Case Keenum now had another really poor year with the Broncos. So tough to say that he would have done a lot better, but maybe just because of the chemistry factor, they could have won a couple more games, which could have equaled a playoff berth. But I don't think that they made necessarily the wrong decision. I do think they overpaid, though, for Kirk Cousins, but that's just the nature of where the game is right now.
Yeah, the factor that they overpaid and they gave him too much guaranteed money could cost them over the next couple of years. And who knows, if they don't make the playoffs next year and they have another subpar season, it wouldn't really surprise me if they let Kirk Cousins go or maybe offer him in some sort of trade. It wouldn't even surprise me if they try it this offseason if they're able to get something good.
I mean, it would surprise me a little bit. I think Kirk Cousins is a good NFL quarterback, and I think with the right team and the right team chemistry, he can make it far. I just think they didn't have that this year. They had some off-the-field issues with some of their players, too. It just didn't go right. It didn't go the way they wanted. We'll have to see what next year brings for them. I think that he has a better chance of competing next year, having 1 year with this offense under his belt.
Yeah, and definitely you look at that division as well. The Lions, they seem to take another step back. The Packers, they've struggled the last couple of years, so that they have an opportunity in that division or even the wild card. So their opportunity isn't out yet, but it is getting put into question after the signing of Kirk Cousins. But let's move on to another player and team that is starting to have some question marks, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars and Leonard Fournette. So we saw this past week that Leonard Fournette and T.J. Yeldon had made some comments in regards to this past week or this game this past week, and Tom Coughlin actually called out the players, saying that they were being unprofessional. And then we later did see this week that their running backs coach Tyrone Wheatley was let go, and rumor has it that part of the comments led to the coach being let go. So because Leonard Fournette got suspended this year, the Jaguars actually voided all his guaranteed money that he signed with his rookie deal. Do you think because of all this that we could be seeing the end of Leonard Fournette in Jacksonville?
We could be seeing the end of Leonard Fournette in Jacksonville, just because when you seem disinterested about your team, the team does not want to keep you. We've seen that with guys already. We've seen this with questions on a lot of players. Le'Veon Bell was a problem for the Steelers, and they didn't want to fork over the money for him. There was questions on whether the Giants would give Odell Beckham the money that he wanted. When you don't seem like you want to be there playing your hardest, even when it doesn't matter, you're not going to stay with the team. We also saw that with the coaches we were talking about, where their players didn't seem like they wanted to play and the coach got let go, especially with Vance Joseph. Even the announcers on television during that last game on Monday Night Football against the Raiders were talking about how this does not look good for him when the players don't want to be there. Leonard Fournette was basically indicting his coach and the entire coaching staff, saying, like, I'm not even interested enough to watch the game right now. I'm just going to sit here on the bench and not do anything. Same with T.J. Yeldon. So it's not a good look for the Jaguars, but then who on that team really was having a good show this year? The whole team seemed dysfunctional. The whole team seemed disinterested. It was just one of the most epic collapses in the NFL. But I wouldn't be surprised if Fournette doesn't come back. I think he's talented enough that they're going to still want him on the team, though. So we'll see how his actions after this play a factor into if he's kept or not.
Yeah, you look at the situation. I think that giving Fournette an opportunity, I think waiving his guaranteed money is showing that he needs to step up. He's been suspended multiple times since being in the league, and he's been injury prone. So I think this could be a sign to Fournette that he needs to mature up and step up. And I think that he has the potential to do that. T.J. Yeldon, he kind of did this at the bad time. He's an impending free agent, and you look at some of these remarks are going to have teams question his character and if he's going to be able to get signed or not. That's going to be the question going forward. But you look at that team, even if they were to get rid of both those guys, I mean, they did trade for Carlos Hyde, who signed a 3-year deal in Cleveland. So they still have him on the books. And even if they keep Fournette, they do have that security in Hyde in case things were to get bad again. So I don't necessarily think that that's going to be an issue for the Jags going forward. I think that Fournette does stay, and they do have the security with Fournette in case things go bad. But yeah, Jacksonville it was just a crazy season for them. They started the season very well. People thought that this for sure could be a team that could get to the Super Bowl or even win the Super Bowl. But we saw a lot of the issues that have plagued them in the past before. We saw Bortles get benched, then we saw him come back into the game. But I think the one issue that this team had this year was the fact that they did not have a number one weapon in the receiving game. And we did see Marquise Lee get injured in the preseason. I think that hurt this season and derailed what could have been a great season for the Jags. But that's just something we're going to have to wait and see going into next year, if they go after another free agent or if they try keeping the talent.
Yeah, it's tough with the Jaguars because that whole team just collapsed. There were so many expectations there, and it just all amounted to such an awful season. And so you have to wonder what they're going to do now, because there's so many pieces that look like they need to be upgraded, so many people that look like they need to go. So yeah, that's just another question in the multitude of questions that we're going to have about the Jaguars all off season. But go to another team that is a little bit of turmoil right now. Let's go to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we saw them have the Le'Veon Bell issue, and it was an ongoing problem for most of the season. And now Antonio Brown is having issues too. So Antonio Brown and Ben Roethlisberger got into a confrontation that eventually led to Antonio Brown being benched for the Week 17 game versus the Bengals. Do you think that Antonio Brown could actually be sent out of Pittsburgh, or do you think that this is just a non-issue that's going to resolve itself?
Looking at this situation, they basically went through this the whole season to begin with Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell missed the whole season because he didn't want to sign his contract, believes he should be paid more. And you want to know what? James Conner stepped up. Didn't necessarily put up the numbers that Le'Veon Bell would, but he put up strong enough numbers to make it to the Pro Bowl. And he deserves to go to the Pro Bowl this year. He was a great back for them. We did see at times where he was still trying to figure things out, but he did have those games where he could be a number one back for any team in this league. And you want to know what? Looking at the Steelers, I think they would be okay without Antonio Brown. Now, you look at with Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, this team is a Super Bowl contending team almost every year. You take away Le'Veon Bell, and you saw this team that they're not going to be as good, but they can still scare some teams, just missing out on the playoffs this year. But remember, James Conner did miss the last few games, and that definitely did hurt their chances a little. You look at if you take Le'Veon or Antonio Brown out of the picture, they do lose a lot of production from him, but I think they'd be okay. Juju Smith-Schuster has shown that he can be a number one receiver for that team, and I think he could do a very good job there. They have two very solid tight ends in Jesse James and Vance McDonald. And they did just draft a receiver in James Washington. Remember, they drafted his college buddy Mason Rudolph who could take over for Ben Roethlisberger in a couple of years. So I do think that it would make sense to get rid of Antonio Brown if you can trade him and get enough back for him. Because you want to know what? They could trade Brown. They could do a couple things. They could trade Brown, get a solid receiver back, and then you lose production from Brown, but you also gain something by getting another receiver. Another option, you could trade Brown and you could get another back if you don't think Conner is the future because you have some questions about it. The other option is you could trade and try and fix something on the defense for any spot you think could be the issue. I think that trading Antonio Brown could be a good thing for this team. They need to get rid of all this drama because this is all we've heard from the Steelers the past few years is drama with Le'Veon Bell and even drama with Antonio Brown. We've seen him have these crazy antics on the field, some of these inappropriate celebrations, and him going off on himself, going off on his teammates, going off on his coaches during games on the sideline. I think at this point, Pittsburgh not making the playoffs, I think they need to do a restart. I think trading Antonio Brown would be the smart move.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you. And I only say I think because when you get rid of Antonio Brown and you're already going to lose Le'Veon Bell, and Ben Roethlisberger is going to retire soon. If he doesn't see that that team has a chance to make a Super Bowl run, he's going to be gone. You're going to lose your three most notable players from the past few seasons. But maybe that's what has to happen because, like you said, from the start of the year, all that we heard about the Steelers was turmoil in the locker room, turmoil on the internet, turmoil on the field, people getting benched, people calling out other players. And sometimes even if these stars are important to your franchise, you have to let them go because the Steelers are more important than Antonio Brown, more important than Le'Veon Bell, more important than Ben Roethlisberger. And you see it with each team, unless they're lucky enough to have some sort of seamless transition from one guard to the next, and they have players that are there to facilitate that transfer, a team's going to eventually get blown up. We saw it with the Seahawks and the Legion of Boom where they sort of just disbanded. Now that team's back in the playoffs again. They have more players on defense that are showing up. And that's just what you have to do. You have Juju Smith-Schuster kind of waiting in the wings to take over as the number one receiver. James Conner, this was just his rookie season. That guy's probably going to get better. You have him at running back. And then if you get rid of Antonio Brown, you get rid of Le'Veon Bell, that team might be okay. They're not going to be quite as dynamic on offense as they have been, but they might not be as horrible as you think. And then eventually when Roethlisberger does retire, you have these guys that are the new transitioning number ones being ready to play with a new quarterback as opposed to Antonio Brown, who's not going to want to play with a rookie quarterback anyway. So it's got to happen at some point. It might as well be now when these guys are causing a ruckus. Get rid of them and show them what being a Steeler is all about.
Yeah, and you look at the case for Ben Roethlisberger, it could be a case where he sees this rebuild and maybe decides to retire. That could be. But going back to Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, looking at the past turmoil, the one person that supported Le'Veon Bell throughout all this was Antonio Brown, saying that he deserves to get paid, that he should have got paid. So that was the start of some of the negative stuff that you could see come from Brown. But I think it's time that we both agree I think need to go into a new direction sooner rather than later. And I think it's come to that point where they have to do it now.
Yeah, so we concur on that one. That's good. We should be the general managers of the Steelers.
Yeah, I mean, we could definitely turn that team into a Super Bowl contender.
I wouldn't go that far. We might be able to get a win.
It would be tough, though, because we are Packers fans, so we would have to change our alliance.
That's true. I mean, I'm good with that, especially after this season. Give me like $5 and I'll cheer for whatever team you want me to.
Yeah, very true. But let's move on to some college football now. So we saw some big-time bowl games this week, along with the semifinals of the college football playoff, where we saw Clemson dominate Notre Dame 30-3, and then we saw Alabama win in a high-scoring game against Oklahoma. I believe it was 45-34, setting up for the fourth straight year a meeting in the college football playoff, and for the third time in 4 years in the national championship game between Alabama and Clemson. Now, before we talk about that game, Ryan, of the bowl games that we've seen so far, which one would you say was probably the best non-playoff game?
Oh, man. There have not been a lot of great bowl games, Ian. Let's think about this. There was one that was early on that was really good that I don't even remember what team it was. But recently, the Missouri-Oklahoma State game was pretty solid. I can't even tell you what bowl it was, but it was a solid game. I watched a lot of these bowl games, but not a whole lot of them stick out in my memory as great games. The one that I remember from the past the most that I think is the best bowl game ever, Boise State versus Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, you look at when we see some of these non-title games, some of them are kind of hard to point out. But yeah, looking at that Oklahoma-Missouri game, I want to say it was the Taxlers Bowl, but I'm not for sure. But yeah, it was a high-scoring game. We saw a lot of positives from Drew Lock, who could be a potential draft pick this year in the NFL draft, could possibly be one of the first quarterbacks taken off the board. It was a game that went down to the end. A fourth down run by Drew Lock was not able to convert, and that's what led to Oklahoma State getting a big win. But some of these games that we were excited to see kind of didn't turn out the way that I think the fans wanted to see.
You know which one was the worst game, I think?
Which one?
And it wasn't even bad because of like the score or anything, but Georgia and Texas. Man, how bad did Georgia look after taking Alabama to the brink of losing? And then just laying an absolute egg against Texas. That was just not good.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that one. I mean, I do give hats off to Texas because I was very impressed with Texas in that game. Sam Ehlinger looked like the future of that team as a sophomore. But yeah, Georgia came out flat, and you would not expect that, especially since they were playing it was in Louisiana, so they're playing in SEC territory. But yeah, you look at some of the other games, a couple that stand out. Obviously, you look at the game between Florida and Michigan. A lot of people thought that was going to be a very intense game. Florida blew them out of the water. You look at the Rose Bowl, it became a very good game at the end, but that was a game that Ohio State basically dominated from the beginning until late in that fourth quarter, where we saw Washington make that comeback. You look at one of the games I was actually looking forward to that wasn't like a New Year's Six game between Michigan State and Oregon. Oregon's a high-scoring team, and they won the game 7-6.
That was a super weird one. You do not see that score in any NFL or college game anymore.
Yeah, it was a great defensive team against a great offensive team, but it's surprising that the defensive team won the battle, but they lost the war in the game. And then I would say if any of the New Year's Six games that I saw that weren't the playoff, I would say that the UCF and LSU game was a entertaining game, but like I said, you take Mackenzie Milton out of that game for UCF, and it just kind of loses some of the hype that I would have had if he would have played in that game. We did see an impressive game from Joe Burrow at the quarterback for LSU, who threw for over 300 yards and had 4 touchdowns. But yeah, this year it just seemed like some of the games didn't stand out as exciting. I mean, I would say even the playoff games, you look at Notre Dame put up a dud against Clemson. Clemson showing that they're dominant. And you look at Alabama, they dominated in the first quarter. They were up by 3 touchdowns. It was basically game over from there.
Yeah, like it's weird because they come from totally different conferences. Most of them haven't played mutual opponents throughout the year. They have a month to prepare, so you don't know what you're going to get whatsoever coming in these games. They're almost impossible to predict a lot of the time. Like, who would have thought that Iowa would have beaten Mississippi State? Certainly not me. Kentucky beating Penn State. You just have no idea what's going to happen with any of these games. I wanted to highlight a few of the other ones that I thought were really good. You had the Alamo Bowl, with Washington State defeated Iowa State 28-26. That one was good. Vanderbilt losing to Baylor in the Outdoors Texas Bowl was really good. That had a lot of lead changes, high scoring. It was 45-38. And then the one that I honestly thought was the best bowl game of the season was probably either Wake Forest versus Memphis. Wake Forest won 37-34, or Florida International beating Toledo 35-32. Those games had lead changes at the very end too, which made them very interesting. But the problem is no one's going to remember them, because they're insignificant. They don't matter. These were like 9-4, 7-6 teams, and Memphis was 8-6. So, there's no intrigue there. Like, it's a cool game to watch. It's fun. One team's probably happy. It's exciting. They got to go to a bowl game, but like in the lore of sports, nobody's going to remember the 2018 Makers Wanted Bahamas Bowl between Florida International and Texas.
Yeah, and you look at, I remember on Friday, some of the major games that started. The game that I'm talking about was one I wasn't able to watch, but I was excited to look over the stats for the game. It was Auburn and Purdue, because Auburn had a downside of a year. They were very inconsistent, and Purdue was able to do well enough to win the bowl, to get to a bowl game, and their offense looked very well. We did see against Ohio State, and Auburn came out and just flat out annihilated Purdue, winning I believe it was 63-14. It was, I think it was 56-0 at one point in that game. And I was hoping that was going to be an exciting, high-scoring game, and it was for one team. So, yeah, there were some good games, but I wouldn't say right now we saw a super-duper exciting game, but we do have the national championship game coming up this Monday, again with Alabama and Clemson. So, Ryan, we have talked about this before in the show when we talked about the teams that got in. You had said Alabama was going to win. I said Clemson's going to win. Are you changing your thoughts on it, or are you sticking with Alabama?
I am sticking with Alabama. I thought Clemson played really well against Notre Dame, especially after they scored their first touchdown to break that stalemate. That was a defensive showdown before then. But I just think there's too much from Alabama for Clemson to handle. If Clemson does win, though, it'll be because their defensive line is incredibly solid. Probably the best defensive line in the entire nation, and a lot of those players are going to the NFL. Probably, 6 of their defensive linemen are going to end up playing in the NFL that they have on their roster right now. So if it's anything that gets the job done for Clemson, it'll be that. But I think that Alabama is too complete of a team. Trevor Lawrence is a freshman. Tua has already got a national championship under his belt. And if he doesn't win it, then Jalen Hurts will be able to come in and help and finish the game off if Tua has a bad game. So I just think Alabama is going to be too much for them.
Yeah, imagine if Jalen Hurts were to come into the game for Tua and prevail. Just be like the opposite of what happened last year in the national championship game. But I'm going to stick with Clemson in this one, because you look at Alabama and some of their tougher games this year. We've seen in games where they've gone against great defenses, in Georgia and LSU, where the offense hasn't necessarily looked the best, but they were able to pull out the games. And then where we've seen them play great offenses in a Georgia and a Oklahoma, but you could tell that the offenses had something missing. But I think this Clemson team does have the complete talent to beat Alabama. They have one. They're one of the best quarterbacks that, possibly the best quarterback they're going to see this year in Trevor Lawrence. A dynamic running back in Travis Etienne, and like you had said, they have a dominant defense. I think can take over and control the game. I think that they're going to go in. They're going to win the game, and I don't want to say we might be seeing Alabama Clemson 5 next year, but if some of these pieces return, we could see it again next year as well.
I really hope Clemson does win. I like Clemson a lot better than Alabama. Clemson has interesting players, interesting storylines. Alabama has a very angry and salty Nick Saban. So I'm pulling for Clemson. What's hard about college football, though, why we see this now repeated almost every single year, is that in the NFL, in the NBA, in any other sport, when you have a really good season and you're a perennial champion, your players are going to get picked off by other teams. So when, the Patriots play in a Super Bowl and they win or they do really well, other teams are more apt to go get their players when they're free agents, or the players are more apt to leave to go elsewhere to get more money, to make more of their own name as opposed to their team. But in college sports, when you're a successful program and the only thing that's going to be a mainstay is your coach, more players are going to come in at a higher level. So players around the country watch these games and they say, I want to go to Alabama because then I can win a championship. I can be in the NFL. I want to go to Clemson. Then I can be in the NFL and win a championship with the team. No one looks at these colleges and goes, I think I'm going to go to Tulane. They haven't done it in a while and they can offer me more than these other teams can, because that's just not how it works. So we're set up to see Alabama versus Clemson every single year. And if it's not Alabama versus Clemson, it'll be Oklahoma, or it'll be Notre Dame, or it'll be Ohio State, or it'll be Michigan. It's going to be the same teams over and over because that's what we're set up to see with this format.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Both these teams are set up to get far into getting to the playoffs and getting to the championship each year. With Tua still being there, he'll be there another year. Trevor Lawrence going to be there a couple of years. So this could be potential of a rivalry continuing over the next couple of years until we do see someone take over. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens on Monday night and see which one of us correctly picked the national champion. But let's move on to the playoffs now in the NFL. So before we do make our picks for this week and then talk about who's going to win the Super Bowl, or make our Super Bowl picks now that we know the playoff teams, Ryan, I want to talk about our upset picks from last week. So we did see, unfortunately, the Dolphins were not able to come through for you last week, and the Falcons were able to come through for me. So now I own a 2-game advantage in the who's going to be upset pick. So I want to ask you this first. Do you believe there's going to be an upset this week? And if you do, who's it going to be?
I'm going to answer this question differently for you, Ian. I'm going to give you the only team that I don't think is going to be upset. So I'm picking 3 upsets out of these games that are going to happen. And the only team that I'm picking to hold their ground and be the favorite team to win is the Chicago Bears. So I like the Colts to beat the Texans. I like the Seahawks to beat the Cowboys. And I like the Chargers to beat the Ravens. So I'm going to go Eagles as the only team that loses. I know they have Nick Foles back in the lineup now. They've been playing really well. But going into Chicago, where it's going to be extremely cold, more than likely, is not going to be a good recipe for that offense, who's traditionally this year had a very porous offensive line, not the recipe for success against the Chicago team that's been playing really well as of late.
I like your confidence here, right? You need to get ahead in the upset picks. So you're going with the big 3 here. I do like that. But I also do like a couple of upsets this week. I do like the Chargers beating the Ravens as the one upset. But I'm going to only go 2. And the one that I'm going to go with is the one you did not pick. I think the Eagles could shock the Bears. The reason why I say this is because we see a Bears team here that's very inexperienced when it comes to playing in playoff games. They don't have much talent, whether it be veterans or young guys that have had playoff experience before. When you look at Philadelphia, the majority of that team has either been to the playoffs either last year or multiple times in the past. And I think that they're going to be able to use that confidence and advantage and upset the Bears on the road this week.
That's a bold one. I
Yeah.
hope it happens, to be honest. I really do. I don't like the Bears. I want to see them lose. I would gladly give you the crown and upset pick for this season if it means the Bears losing.
Yeah, like I said, that would be something crazy to see, and hopefully it does happen. But so let's move. Let's continue on and talk about our picks for this week. So you already had said you have the Chargers or Colts and Seahawks and the Bears. I have the Eagles, Chargers. I have the Texans and the Cowboys winning. So now moving forward, who do you have now in your Super Bowl matchup, and who do you have winning the Super Bowl?
I still have the exact same matchup that I had at the start of the year, the New England Patriots and the Los Angeles Rams, and I think the Patriots are going to win the Super Bowl. And I know this sounds crazy because the Patriots haven't been playing that well lately, and I know it sounds crazy because the Rams honestly haven't been playing that well lately, but I just think when the playoffs happen, we're going to see Sean McVay start to tinker with that team a little bit. I don't think he wanted to give too much away at the end of the season, and I think we're going to see Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, and the rest of the crew return to form in the AFC. I think that it's going to be Saints versus Rams in the NFC, and then Patriots versus Chiefs in the AFC. We're going to get the 2 and the 1 seed matching up in both, with the Patriots defeating the Rams in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on the case that I also have the Rams getting there, and I also have the Rams losing in the Super Bowl. Remember, I did pick the Rams to get there at the beginning of the year. Unfortunately, I picked them against the Jags, and that didn't work out too well.
You were pretty nice to me last year when I picked the Giants, so I'm not going to remind you about the Jaguars.
Okay, so the team that I'm going to talk about has been a team that I wouldn't necessarily say they're a surprise, but they're definitely a team that I think could be the scariest. And I think that's the Los Angeles Chargers. And you look at this team, you look at the beginning of the year, their defense had some question marks because of some injuries. Then Joey Bosa got back, and we were finally able to see what could have been a great end of the year. But then we saw Melvin Gordon get injured, and Austin Eckler get injured, and Keenan Allen get injured. So we've never really seen this team fully healthy for a full game. And this, I believe, would be the first week that this team could be fully healthy for a game, and they picked the right time to do it, being the playoffs. I think that they go on the road this week, they get a big win, and then I think that depending on where they would play the following week, this team could go on the road and end up getting to the Super Bowl without going or having a home game. Remember, if they do get a home game, they're going to be playing in like a 16,000 capacity stadium in StubHub Stadium. But I think that they're scary enough. I think they have enough depth at every position that they can get to the Super Bowl, and then I think they would win the battle of LA in Atlanta to win the Super Bowl.
Battle for LA would be really interesting. I wonder if that would get more or less viewership having just one city involved in the NFL championship.
Yeah, it's a weird situation because we saw the Chargers, they lost a lot of fan base when they went to Los Angeles, but when the Rams went to Los Angeles, it seemed like they gained a lot of fan base. So I think it could be a mixed match on if it'll be a lot of them.
Yeah, very interesting. I don't even know how I feel about that. You've thrown me for a loop. But we're going to end this thing talking about fantasy like we always do, even though the fantasy playoffs are in the past now. Which person do you regret most either drafting or picking up this year for any of your teams?
Yeah, looking at it, obviously, I'm going to look at my paid league for this one because I was the defending champ, and I really needed to have. I knew the odds were going to be stacked against me this year because we went from a 12-team league to a 10-team league, which means the teams were just going to be better and better this year. And the one pick that I am regretting has to be Larry Fitzgerald from the Arizona Cardinals. I look at this guy and I was like, he's basically the number one option on that team. Even with Sam Bradford, I think that he could be a good option. You want what? We really did not see him come into play until the second half of the season. And at that point, you either had dropped him or you couldn't really play him because you didn't really trust him. And that really hurt me throughout the season because I really only had two viable options at wide receiver that I could play. I had Michael Thomas, but then I ended up trading him because I needed to get some more depth at wide receiver because I had Jarvis Landry as well, but he had some weeks where he really couldn't do anything. And I was able to get Tyler Boyd and Emmanuel Sanders, but Sanders did get hurt right as the playoffs got started for fantasy. So if I had any regret, it would definitely be drafting Larry Fitzgerald.
Okay. This is the easiest question for me. Le'Veon Bell. I drafted Le'Veon Bell thinking that he was going to play, thinking he was going to be a stand-up guy, and he did not come through for me. He did not play. I wasted my first-round draft pick. But the positive of that was I was able to pick up James Conner after I drafted Le'Veon Bell. So it ended up I still got a starting running back who had a really solid season, so I can't complain too much. But Le'Veon Bell did not come through for me.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that one for sure on your end. Definitely hurt a lot of fantasy people, I think, in this year, unless they were able to pick up James Conner. But if they weren't able to, then I think a lot of teams lost their chance at winning right away during the season. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on for next year on where Le'Veon Bell is going to be playing and is he going to be drafted higher than James Conner, I think is going to be the question going forward. But before we do end our fantasy football segment, I do want to point out that when it comes to fantasy football, make sure you pay attention to the news right away because an example for me, I was one of the ones that had Kareem Hunt before the incident with him. And because I wasn't able to pay attention to the news, I was unable to pick up any of his backups. And I think that cost me in a good number of my league. So if you are one of those guys that has a guy that has a interesting history, whether it be on the field, injury, or off the field, make sure you pay attention to the news so you can get your backups.
Yeah, definitely. Get that handcuff back right off the bat. Don't wait. Do not wait for someone else to steal your running back, essentially. Thanks again for listening, guys. We will see you next week.
Yes, we will. Again, make sure to listen to us each week on either iTunes, Google Play, or Spreaker, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And yeah, as Ryan said, we will see you next week, and we will give you the results of the Wild Card Weekend and National Championship. Again, thank you for listening to Touchdown Tuesdays, the official football podcast of Bruce Sports. Have a good night, everybody.